we're going to look at the evidence for Saudi Arabia as the fulfillment of Revelation 17 and 18 as the great harlot. Next slide. First question, first criterion. Does Saudi Arabia sit in a desert? That's an actual picture of a Saudi desert. Saudi Arabia today is the proverbial fulfillment. I mean, she is the literal fulfillment of what the Bible was referring to when it says she was in an eremos, in a desert. Saudi Arabia is the Arab Sea, the great desert, the desert of the sea. And so the answer is absolutely yes. Next slide. Is Saudi Arabia royalty? In the late 1800s, Ibn al-Wahhab, he was a sort of an Islamist reformer, good friends with Ibn al-Saud, and these two together really emerged in the past century as the rulers of Saudi Arabia. Ibn al-Wahhab more of the religious side of things, and then the Saudis as the political leaders. And today, the Saudi royals are one of the most corrupt and powerful monarchies in the earth. Is she both a powerful religious and economic influence in the earth? Next slide. Saudi Arabia is, in essence, the very womb of Islam. She is the heart of Islam. The Saudi monarchy are the custodians of the two holy mosques, the two holy cities, as they say it, Mecca and Medina. They are the custodians of, again, Mecca, the world capital of idolatry. Is she a powerful religious and economic influence in the earth? Next slide, some basic facts regarding Saudi Arabia. They have a GDP 3 times larger than the UAE. The UAE being Dubai and Abu Dhabi. How many of you have looked at pictures of Dubai in recent years? They have the world's tallest building that they named the Khalifa Tower, the Khalif Tower. They've built literally man-made islands out in the ocean that are shaped like these stylized palm trees lined with multi-million-dollar mansions, hundreds of them along these palm fronds, just sitting out in the blue ocean. They've got Dubai World, it's called, where they've built man-made islands, all in the shape of various countries, so that if you want, you can buy a United States-shaped island, your own private island. And I think even like Brad Pitt and various American celebrities have spent, multi-millions of dollars to buy these private islands. And just, it's unbelievable to watch, and the amount of money. I think it's something like a couple of years ago, it was like 3/4 of all of the cranes in the earth were in this one city. Just the growth was amazing. Saudi Arabia has a GDP 3 times larger than the UAE, just for context. She exports more oil than any other nation in the earth. And of course, the world runs on oil. It is the lifeblood of industry, of everything. They export more oil than any other nation. They are the oil exporting alpha dog of the world. They also have the greatest percentage of oil reserves, at least allegedly, under the ground, more than any other nation in the world. And again, they are home to Mecca. So yes, Saudi Arabia is an economic powerhouse, hands down, and yes, Saudi Arabia is a spiritual influence in the earth. Next slide. Does Saudi Arabia live in extravagant luxury? Does the Saudi monarchy, do they live in what we could call extravagant luxury? If the Bible was trying to describe and prophesy and hearken to a reality, would this be the description that would apply to the Saudis? Next slide. Case in point is the Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. This guy is someone that you should get to know. Next slide. Here is his diamond-studded $4.8 million Mercedes. It's his 38th car. Of course, by now, I'm sure he has many more. This was at a car show recently. I'm not sure if it was in Dubai or Saudi or the United States. It was probably, I don't know, it could have been anywhere. Next slide, just so you can see the size of the diamonds. They're not small diamonds. Again, these are toys. $4.8 million. It's a toy. Why would you cover a car with diamonds? I mean, you know, why not just kind of go extravagant and gold plate it like most other eccentric billionaires? No, you got to cover it with diamonds. The deceased King Fahd, okay, this was the last king. Just a few examples. This is from a book by Gerald Posner called Secrets of the Kingdom, the Inside Story of the Saudi-U.S. Connection. He said this is a quote, "The deceased King Fahd owned dozens, not just a dozen, dozens of palaces, each one grander than the last. His official palace was essentially a tiny Vatican city with opulent furnishings and walls that ran several miles around the perimeter. Architects who worked on the palaces estimated that they were worth several billion in the 1980s. Okay, in the 1980s. Today, I don't know with inflation what several billion would be worth. That is one of his palaces. One of his palaces was worth several billion. Now, King Fahd had a son, or still has a son, Prince Aziz. They called him Azuzi, which in Arabic is like dearie, like little dearie. And he, as well as having multiple homes, he essentially built for himself sort of an Islamic, like Michael Jackson's Wonderland Ranch. He literally built for himself a replica of the White House. I mean, it was just this bizarre, you know, with all of these shrines and Islamic mosque-looking buildings, and it was estimated to be worth $4.6 billion. Okay, now think of this, a private residence, one of many, and all you are is the son of a king, and one of your properties is worth $46,000 million. That's the kind of money that you have at your disposal. Now, just as we're discussing these things, we're discussing luxury. Is there a great American quarterback, an American president, a rap artist, an actor, an extravagant real estate mogul? Is there anybody that you can think of, a computer nerd, that has that kind of money to waste and to throw around? That kind of wealth. Next slide. This is, again, speaking of King Fahd. He also had a 100-room house in Marbella, Spain, a spectacular estate outside of Paris that was initially built for the 18th century French kings. It was built for kings. He had a mansion near London on which he spent nearly $60 million in refurbishments, a remodel. I would have liked to have been a contractor on that deal. We only charge 15%. And a sprawling palatial in Geneva, in which he was fond of boasting, had over 15,000 telephone lines. He flew between cities in his private 747, fitted with an enormous pink master bedroom, gold, literally gold toilets, mahogany elevator, sauna, baccarat, crystal chandeliers. His yacht was $50 million. He kept over 24 Rolls Royces fitted with gold hood ornaments and grills in his various homes. Again, King Fahd, this is the deceased King Fahd. This is stuff that goes back to the 80s. Next slide. How she has glorified herself and lived luxuriously. Does this apply? Would this be fitting to apply to the Saudi monarchy? Are there anyone else? Is there any other royal entity in the world? Is there any other royal entity that lives in a desert in the earth that we can imagine that would compare to the Saudis with regard to the luxury and the amount of wealth that they possess? Next slide. Do the kings and the peoples of the earth commit fornication with her? Next slide. Again, I mentioned Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. In June of 2006, just a few years ago, CARE, that's the Council of American Islamic Relations, announced that it was planning a meeting with bin Talal. Now, CARE sets itself up as sort of an Islamic civil rights entity. It's nothing but an Islamic propaganda, really a jihadist movement here in the States. I don't mean military jihad, but legal, and intellectual jihad to try to spread the propaganda of Islam in the States and to, push its way through the legal system for the gradual implication of Islamic law. The spokesperson for CARE, Ibrahim Hooper, stated outright, this is an American news guy that converted to Islam, became the spokesperson for CARE. He came right out and said that he desired to see the Constitution of the United States replaced with Islamic law. And he said, I'm not going to use physical violence to make that happen, but that's what I want. Okay? That is an enemy of the country. This is who CARE is. They try to present themselves as deserving to partake in the national discussion. They should be pushed aside as radicals and as enemies of the country. They should be marginalized, but yet they are received by politicians and by the media as having a legitimate voice. They should have no such thing. Prince Dalal donated $50 million to CARE to devise a campaign to create a better understanding of Islam and Muslims in the U.S. Prince Dalal also donated, and we'll touch on this, next slide, $20 million to Harvard to create an Islamic studies program. He donated another $20 million to Georgetown. He came to Harvard and he lectured the Harvard students on the need for the United States and Americans to be more tolerant of Islam. Now, to put this in context, you have a Saudi prince who comes from a country where it is illegal to openly practice Christianity or any other religion, where up until a few years ago you couldn't even enter the country if you were Jewish. You're not allowed to build a single church, synagogue, or anything other than a mosque in that country. And he comes to the United States and tells us that we need to be more tolerant. Okay? That is the very picture, the very definition of hypocrisy. Harvard was influenced. They committed financial fornication with this man. They received his $20 million, which is nothing more than the spread of an Islamic propaganda educational machine coming out of Harvard. Same thing with Georgetown, and they have John Esposito, who is a Islamist apologist, an American professor who writes and gets interviews, and again, he's treated as though he deserves a voice in the discussion. He is an Islamist, and he is paid for, and he's in the back pocket of the Saudis to the tune of millions of dollars. Okay, this is how it works. You don't give someone $20 million for no reason. Okay, you expect something in return. This is how it works. I don't mean to be cynical, but my dad was right. Next slide. Nothing's for free. Jimmy Carter. He is perhaps, there he is with bin Talal. Jimmy Carter is perhaps the most corrupted politician, president that this country has seen in years, okay, in decades. He is absolutely, completely in the back pocket of the Saudis. We're going to look at some of the details. Next slide. He refuses to disclose the amount of money that Saudi financiers have donated. He refuses to announce that. Some of what we do know, however, in the late 1970s, a BCCI, that was a brazenly anti-Semitic Saudi-funded bank, controlled actually by the Saudi royal family, bailed him out. They bailed his family peanut farm out, to the tune of millions of dollars. The founder of BCCI gave Carter $500,000 to help him establish the Carter Center. I'm not sure exactly what his center is called. And then they gave him more tn $10 million donation to his various projects. Again, this is going back to the 1970s. Going back to the 1970s. I don't know what $10 million is the equivalent of today. Next slide. In 1993, King Fahd presented Carter with a gift of $7.6 million. A gift. Merry Christmas. Here's $7.6 million. The king is only one of several Saudi royals that have donated multiple millions to Carter. As of 2005, again, bin Talal, I spell his name differently there, he's donated over $5 million to Carter's center. Next slide. He received multiple millions from this individual, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Nahyan. He is a brazen anti-Semite. He is a Jew hater. Okay, he is a Jew hater. The Zayed Center for the Coordination and Follow-up, a group funded by Zayed, he hosted various speakers. Among the speakers, some referred to Jews as the enemies of all nations. Okay, that sounds like Nazism to me. He attributed the assassination of John Kennedy to Israel and the Mossad. He blamed 9/11 on the attacks. He blamed the 9/11 attacks on the United States against our own military. And he stated that the Holocaust was a fable. Okay, is this the kind of group that you would like to be associated with if you cared about your reputation? Next slide. They also hosted a speech by Jimmy Carter. He was happy to speak there. He was happy to receive millions of dollars from Zayed. Harvard University, who did accept the money from Walid, refused to take the money from Zayed because he was so openly outspoken in his anti-Semitism and his Jew hatred. Okay, even Harvard refused the money. Carter, however, chose to keep the money. And then he said this, with regard to the financial award that he received, he said, "This award has special significance for me because it is named for my personal friend, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan." This is one of our presidents. Next slide. The Saudi-based bin Laden family, okay, i.e. Osama bin Laden, they're a construction family, the most significant construction family in Saudi Arabia. They've donated large sums of money to Carter. Despite the Saudi Arabian government's vast and ongoing records of human rights abuses. Now, Saudi Arabia is one of the grossest violators of human rights in the world. You know, I mean, if you get caught stealing a car in Saudi Arabia, you know, you could be beheaded in the streets. There are literally human slaves in Saudi Arabia working to build that nation, living in these little trailers at night. They lock them in there, and then they let them out. These women come from the Philippines, you know, Catholic women. They think they're going to be house servants. They end up becoming sex slaves, mistresses, all sanctioned by the Quran. There was a case just a couple of years ago where a Saudi couple was arrested because they brought a Filipino housemaid with them, and she was essentially a sex slave. And then when they got found out, they were arrested. The couple was arrested. The wife was fully complicit with this. And then we literally had Saudi representatives from Saudi Arabia came over, and they said, "You can't arrest him because you're violating his religious rights." Telling the United States that in our country, we can't arrest somebody for slavery because that's his right religiously. Luckily, we didn't cave into that one. That's the type of human rights violations that result when you try to enforce Islamic Sharia law, okay? Now, despite that, despite all of the human rights abuses, in terms of even just these liberal, secular human rights groups, they rate Saudi Arabia as among the worst. Iran is among the worst. Whenever you try to put into place Islamic Sharia law, the result is always the violation of human rights and women's rights and children's rights. The average age for a woman, when the age that she gets married in Yemen, just south of Saudi Arabia, is 14. Okay, so now think of the range. Span out about 5 years in each direction, and that's the average range that a woman gets married. You have recently had an 8-year-old girl who was able to get a divorce from a man in Saudi Arabia because he was in his 30s. She says, all he does is chase me around all day for sex. Okay, that's legal according to Islam. 8-year-old girl. She's been married for a few years. Okay, that's abuse. That is child abuse. Despite Saudi Arabia's record of human rights abuse, the Carter Center for Human Rights program has zero activity in Saudi Arabia. Why? Do you think the multiple $1 million has anything to do with it? And here's the ultimate hypocrisy. Carter is an outspoken critic of what he calls the Jewish lobby. The powerful, all-powerful Jewish lobby, the evil Zionists, with their tentacles spread throughout the whole world, influencing American foreign policy. Folks, when you compare the amount of money that Israel donates to American politicians compared to the millions that the Saudis donate to every American politician of influence, there is no comparison. There is no comparison. And yet he speaks out against the evil Jewish lobby. And then he claims that anyone, any reporter, any politician who has ever received Jewish donations or who has friends that are outspoken Zionists, that they cannot speak to the Middle Eastern situation. And yet, despite the millions of dollars that he receives from the Saudis, he is an outspoken critic of Israel. Okay? The epitome, the essence of hypocrisy. Next slide. He's the author of this rampant distortion of facts. Palestine, peace, not apartheid. Accusing Israel of being an apartheid occupying force, a violator of human rights. Okay? Israel today is the democracy, is the outpost of democracy in the Middle East. Okay? Should we refrain from uncritical criticism of Israel? Of course not. Israel should be subject to criticism just like any other nation. But you know something? You know who are the most outspoken critics of Israel? The Israelis. Okay? They hold themselves accountable. And you have a nation which is one of the most moral, one of the nations that has shown the most restraint, who has shipped humanitarian supplies to her enemies, who has shown more morality and more ethics than virtually any other nation in the world, despite the onslaught against her. And yet, despite the fact that she's surrounded by a sea of nations that are brazen violators of human rights on every count, she receives more criticism than any other nation in the world. And even the UN, deeply influenced by the Saudi and the Palestinian lobby, even they have issued more condemnations of Israel than every other nation in the world combined. Is this fair in any way, shape, or form? And of course, the Saudi millions produced, they got their results, and Carter has become a propagandist for the Saudis. Next slide. Is it just Carter? Well, of course not. Bill Clinton, there's the, just before the Obama election, and they were trying to determine if Hillary if she had been corrupted by Saudi money, so they had to open up the Clintons' record of donations. Next slide. Over $20 to $32 million came from Gulf Arabs and Saudis. The most came directly from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, just please put this in context. $20 to $32 million in donations. What do they expect back from that? Now, our Secretary of State, the present Secretary of State, has received $20 to $32 million. Is there any chance that there could be a conflict of interest here? Do we think that there's any measure of influence peddling, purchasing influence? Do you think that this will have anything to bear on how our Secretary of State deals with issues in the Middle East? Do you think that will result in any undue prejudice against Israel and in favor of the Palestinians and so forth? Next slide. The whole Bush family, as much as I hate to admit it, are probably some of the worst in terms of having a long relational and financial history, and having also received millions upon millions of dollars from the Saudis. The George H.W. Bush, the father, the son, they have long family ties with the Saudi royals. They're close friends with Prince Bandar. He was the former American ambassador from Saudi Arabia, ambassador of Saudi Arabia to the United States for many years. And the Bush family is really no different than any of the previous presidents. Next slide. Why is this information so unknown? I mean, it's not unknown, but why it's so big? I mean, it's so in your face. Why is this not discussed more? Why is it that usually what we hear is a criticism of the Israel lobby? Why don't we hear more about the Saudi lobby? Saudi money, not only does it buy influence, it buys silence. It's that simple. They're paying people millions of... It's not just presidents. It's senators. It's Colin Powell. It's Condoleezza Rice. It's virtually every senator that has retired, that has gotten out. They get on some sort of a board, being a consultant, or just being on some board and getting a couple $100,000 a year just for essentially doing nothing, and that buys influence. This is perhaps the most taboo subject in Washington. There was a book or a report that was written a few years ago where they were trying to blow this whole story open, and the whole thing got shelved. You know, this is a subject you don't talk about. You don't bring this up. Everybody is involved. The secrecy, going back to biblical prophecy, the secrecy of the harlot's sins and her influence are specifically mentioned by Yahweh through the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah 47, verses 7 through 10. You have trusted in your wickedness, the Lord speaking to the harlot, and you have said, no one sees me. No one sees me. Your wisdom and knowledge mislead you when you say to yourself, I am, and there is none beside me. There is an arrogance, there is a confidence, and she believes that what she does is done in secret, and the world turns the other way. I pulled a couple of quotes out of, next slide. Robert Baer, he's a former CIA agent. He wrote a book called Sleeping with the Devil, How Washington Sold Our Souls for Saudi Crude. I mean, it's almost, I mean, this guy's, I don't think he's a believer. He's just a former CIA agent that's had a lot of firsthand experience in the Middle East. And the title of the book is almost prophetic. You know, we're speaking of the harlot that has committed fornication with the kings of the earth, and he titles his book, Sleeping with the Devil, How Washington Sold Our Souls for Saudi Crude. Here's just a few quotes that I pulled out of his book with reference to the sort of the code of silence that surrounds the measure of the incestuous relationship between the American government and the Saudis. He said, Saudi Arabia's seduction of Washington worked the same way. They paid, we took, and everyone politely averted their eyes. The only people who were willing to tell the truth were those on the political fringe, because everybody on the political inside is getting the money, and those on the political fringe, were smugly dismissed as cranks. In other words, of course, that's just, you know, some radical right-wing whatever. Of course, he's filled with all sorts of bizarre conspiracy theories. Next slide. Not to mention our present president, the recent event of him bowing, the bow that never took place. He was just much taller, and so he just had to bend down in order to shake his hand. That was the official explanation, even though, you know, and there's another picture too where it's clear. I mean, he's bowing down. Maybe it was just bad practice, inexperience. You know, I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt, but it was absolutely foolish. Has he had any influence from Saudi money? Next slide. This is from Newsmax. What's the date on that? September, I think, 2008. Obama had close ties to top Saudi advisor at an early age. According to the reports, Obama was friends with this one particular individual. He was had been a former black nationalist, Black Panther, kind of a radical guy, and then he converted to Islam, and he kind of worked his way in and got to be good friends with a bunch of Saudis, and he had a good relationship with Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, and apparently Obama's degree at Columbia and Harvard were paid for by Saudi princes. So again, even, you know, before he became president, going far back, the present president also has been influenced by the Saudis. And, you know, this is one that it's like he refuses to even bring, you know, to allow anybody to discuss this. He's probably been the best at sort of keeping all of this stuff under wraps. Next slide. Revelation 17:18 and then 18 verse 9. Just in light of what we've discussed, and really we've only skimmed the surface, in terms of really looking at we've just skimmed the surface. The woman whom you saw reigns over the kings of the earth. The kings of the earth committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her. Is that an accurate description of what we are seeing in the earth today with the Saudi lobby buying influence in the most powerful nation in the world? And it's not just the United States, it's England, it's all over the place. They are the only nation in the world that has that kind of money, that has that kind of wealth. The world runs on oil. Next slide. Is Saudi Arabia guilty for the blood of the saints, for the blood of the holy ones? Are they guilty for the blood of the Jews and the followers of Jesus? Next slide. The same Prince Ali bin Talal, during a live telethon in April of 2002, sponsored by the Saudi government, this one particular Muslim preacher, so they're having a telethon, they're raising money for Palestinian suicide bombers. They're raising money for Palestine. It went to the families of suicide bombers. Here's what one Muslim preacher said. I am against America. Now again, mind you, in Saudi Arabia, these things aren't on unless they are sanctioned by the government. Okay? These are preachers that are paid for by the government, raised up and trained by the government, and then given a national platform by the government. I am against America until this life ends, until the day of judgment, al-Qiyamah. I am against America. She is the root of all evils and wickedness on the earth. Muslim brothers in Palestine do not have any mercy, neither compassion on the Jews. Their blood, their money, their flesh, their women are yours to take legitimately. God made them yours. Why don't you enslave their women? Why don't you wage jihad? Why don't you pillage them? Okay, Saudi-trained preachers raised on Saudi indoctrination and given a national platform. Okay, that is worse than Nazism. Okay, in our midst, in our world today, that is far worse than Nazism. Next slide. Prince Talal responded by donating $27 million. He was the largest donor in the entire telethon. They raised $110 million. According to Israeli intelligence, the money was the main source of funding that went to 36 families of Palestinian terrorists, including 8 families of suicide bombers. Okay, they know where the money was going. Okay, Prince Talal, the guy that comes over here and lectures us about needing to be more tolerant, the one who sets up programs and donates money to help make the image of Islam better in the United States. On the other hand, donates $27 million to fund the slaughter of Jews, and who supports the type of hate rhetoric that comes out of these kind of preachers. This is what we're dealing with. Are they guilty for the blood of the saints? The Saudi lobby is guilty for influencing anti-Israeli sentiment, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. They have deeply influenced the opinions of the UN, this alleged body of representatives throughout the world. We have a world where anti-Semitism is increasing day by day. And then throughout the world, now please follow this, the Saudis, they raise up and train these hate preachers. They pay for and fund the establishment of the madrasas, the Islamic centers, and the mosques throughout the world, and then they send the hate preachers there, and then they send their books and their literature there. And throughout the United States, you can go into the mosques and you can find the literature with the Saudi government seal of approval on it that encourages jihad against Christians and Americans and Jews. And they are paying for it, and they are the womb of Islam, both historically and today. And not just Islam, but radical Islam. They are the primary source, financially and ideologically, of the spread of radicalism throughout the world today. Okay, now, listen to this one. The largest missionary sending organization in the world is the Southern Baptist Convention. The Saudi Arabian government spends more every 3 days on dawah, that's Islamic evangelism, that the Southern Baptists spend their budget every year. The Saudi Arabian government puts more money forward every 3 days than the largest Christian missionary, Protestant missionary organization in the world spends in an entire year. Saudi Arabia is the source of the violence and the terrorism and the hatred throughout the world today. And our government will do nothing about it because they are in their back pocket. Is the Saudi Arabian government guilty of the blood of the holy ones throughout the earth? Next slide. This is from the Middle Eastern Media Research Institute. For decades, the royal family of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been the main financial supporter of Palestinian groups fighting Israel. They have given over 15 billion Saudi riyals, that's 4 billion US, to finance the continuation of the Intifada, which is also commonly referred to by the Saudi officials as jihad and resistance. They are funding the jihad in Israel. They are funding the jihad around the world. Next slide. Revelation 17:6 and 18:24, I saw the woman. She was drunk with the blood of the holy ones, of the saints, and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. In her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and all who were slain on the earth. Go to the website, The Religion of Peace. Every day he updates the various Islamic terrorist attacks and the deaths that result as a result of Islamic terrorism. We don't even hear about it. We've got terrorism, jihad fatigue. We don't want to hear a news story every day, but they take place around the world every day. In her was found the blood of all who were slain on the earth. Next slide. Do the beast nations hate her? Next slide. These are the nations of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Sudan. Ironically, other than Turkey, all of the nations included there tend to be some of the most rabidly radical Islamists. But see, there's a few things going on there. Saudi Arabia sits just south of Iraq, there on the map. Is that what you have in the Middle East is essentially you have the two alpha dog nations. You have Saudi Arabia, and then you have Iran. Saudi Arabia rules over the two holy mosques. Again, they're the primary oil producers and the primary oil exporters, etc. Iran, being Shia, being of the minority sect of the Shia Muslims, they desperately want to export the Iranian Revolution, and they want to become the new alpha dog. They would love to supplant Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is terrified of them having nukes. It's not just Israel. Okay, Saudi Arabia and Iran in many ways are enemies. Saudi Arabia are the Sunnis, Iran are the Shia, and the Iranians do want to control the region. Historically, Turkey and Saudi Arabia are also at enmity because Turkey ruled the region, and they believe, in fact, that they should still be controlling the holy mosques. They believe that they're the rightful rulers of that entire region, and the Saudi royals have come along and sort of supplanted them in this last century. And beyond that, Saudi Arabia, essentially, the government of Saudi Arabia today, I wonder if I have this in the, yeah, I do. The Saudi Arabian government is essentially like the Branch Davidian Waco cult. Okay, they spend money on the military because they know there's a giant clash coming. They know they are going to be attacked. They know that day is coming. They're very well aware of it. Next slide. This is understood really by people who study the Middle East, those involved in all of this. There's actually been a book discussing the sort of incestuous dance that the Saudis do, because on one side, they live like Westerners, they live like pigs, they live non-Islamic lifestyles, they live just lives of, brazen perversion and so forth with their harems. And then on the other hand, they pay off the radicals, they fund the radicals, but they know the day is coming when the monster that they've created is going to turn on them. And many of the nations, the beast nations, are some of the greatest vehicles of a lot of these radicals. And even within the country, the Saudis have many that are eventually going to desire to kick out the Saudi royals and replace them with a legitimate Islamic government and not a corrupt monarchy. They view them as completely corrupt. And the Saudi royals are afraid of their own people. They're afraid of their own radicals that they create. So they do this dance. On one hand, they try to be friends with the West, and on the other hand, they pay off the radicals. And they have a day of reckoning coming, and they know it. Next slide. This is again from Robert Baer. The Saudi government probably spends more per capita than any other country in the world on arms. It acknowledges only that it spends 13% of its GDP, but half of its revenue is earmarked for military. But listen, they're not spending military, they're not spending money on military to protect themselves primarily from foreign sources. It's primarily to protect themselves from their own people, from an uprising, and they're terrified of it, and they're terrified of Iran across the Persian Gulf. Next slide. If you want to read more about this, I actually do recommend, he's not a believer, and I think he uses some language. It's been a few years since I read this, but it's a great book. It really just deals with this whole tawdry underworld of the relationship between Washington. But you just read it and you just say, absolutely, this thing brings to light this whole paradigm that Saudi Arabia is the whore of the earth. I mean, it's crystal clear, and it's powerful to see it coming from someone who has no grid for the biblical side of this. He's just analyzing it from a political perspective. Next slide. The beast will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. The day is coming when the coming Islamic empire will turn on the harlot. You see, she is going to be confronted and killed by the monster that she has created. Okay, for the past 50 years, the Saudis have spread Wahhabism, radical Islam throughout the earth, and the day is coming when that beast that she created will turn on her and devour her. Next slide. Have the nations of the earth felt the wrath of her false religion? Next slide. It says the nations of the earth were drunk on the wrath of her fornication. The wrath of her fornication. And again, Saudi Arabia is the financier. They are the financiers of radical Islam throughout the world. They pay off the Americans. They pay off the jihadists. That's where the money's coming from. Next slide. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Next. Is Saudi Arabia a rabid consumer? Saudi Arabia produces one thing, actually two things, radical Islam and oil. Other than that, it's a desert. Everything they have, they buy. Everything they have, they import. I have an associate was telling the story of how years back he went to Saudi Arabia, and he was just blown away. He's like, you know, they have these nice cars, these Mercedes, and they drive them, and they don't change the oil. And the engine seizes up, they pull it over on the side of the road, and they leave it there and just get a new car. You know, it's just a different mentality. But when you look at the specific items that are really delineated in Revelation 18, they're all actually things that Saudi Arabia buys. You know, it's gold and this and that and the other thing. And it even says, in the souls of men, slaves. And Saudi Arabia does buy slaves. You know, all of the Saudi royals, you know, the stories of just, they go on and on about their harems and all of the women that they buy and purchase. There's this story that I read about years ago. There was a group called Americans Against the Sawduction of Washington, and it was primarily made up of parents whose children had been kidnapped and smuggled to Saudi Arabia as sex slaves. And one of the stories that came out of this was this gal, and I can't remember her name, but she was one of these early child stars, and she was on you know, one of these morning talk shows, and they said she had like kind of gone through drugs and all these things. She was kind of recounting her life as a child star, and they said, well, what was the scariest thing that ever happened to you? She told the story. She said, you know, one time when I was about 14 years old, I kept getting these huge bouquets of flowers coming to my my office or whatever, day after day for like a week or 2 weeks, and we had no idea. They were just massive. I had no idea where they were from. Finally, after about 2 weeks, there was a card with an invitation to a party in New York City. And so I wanted to see what this was about. 14 years old, I have no idea where her parents were. She goes to this very swanky condo, and she said she opened the doors, and it was just this, like, you know, gilt paradise, just some like ridiculously luxurious condo, and there's all these young models, and you know, and she can't, what in the world, she doesn't, no one even really knows whose place it is. And she starts chatting with this guy. He was an Italian guy who was a chef at this, and he recognized her because she was a fairly well-known actress at the time. And she said, what in the world is this? And they were striking up a conversation. He said, listen, he said, this house is owned, this condominium is owned by some Saudi royal. And he said, and all of the food, you're going to be drugged. You're all going to go to sleep, and you're going to be flown out of the country, you know, via helicopter or whatever, or flown from here to a helicopter. And that, he said, just go out the back door and run. When you get to the bottom of the stairs, run. And she's like, you're kidding me, you know? So she gets to the bottom of the stairs. She opens, there's a couple of guards there, but somehow she runs off. This is a story she tells. You read the stories from these parents, and you know, it's not something that I've investigated deeply, but you've probably seen the old movie Not Without My Daughter. The stories of women going to Saudi Arabia, meeting the swarthy Middle Eastern doctor, you know, young med student, they fall in love, They go there and they want to leave. They have kids. You're not going anywhere. You don't have a driver's license, and the U.S. government will do nothing about it. They will do nothing to try to get them out of there, and they become slaves for the rest of their lives. They can't leave the country, and, you know, this is abundant. And it says they purchase, they deal. One of their wares is the souls of men and slaves. And there's not many countries in the world where it exists on that level. Next slide. Saudi Arabia represent the greatest false religion that has ever existed. Next slide. Here you have the heart of Saudi Arabia, the spiritual capital of Saudi Arabia. This is Mecca. Again, just to put this in context, it's 1.5 billion Muslims every day bow and pray to that little black cube, that little black shrine in the middle of Mecca, in the middle of the Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, as they call it, in the middle of Mecca. Not a single non-Muslim is technically allowed to enter that city. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Every year they make pilgrimage after the tradition of the pagans of ancient times. They encircle the cube, the Kaaba as it's called. Next slide. And embedded on the corner of the cube is the black stone. And the black stone, part of the pilgrimage is that you're supposed to rub the stone and kiss it and touch it, and supposedly when you do that, your sins up until that point in your life are absorbed. And they say, there's an Islamic tradition that says there was a day when that stone was as white as milk, but it has absorbed the sins of so many people that it has become black. This is what Muslims say. So, in place of the blood of Christ, there is a black stone. Next slide. They kiss it, you know, this is sitting on the corner of the cube. Now, I'm not going to get into it in great detail, but essentially, when you look at the historical evidence surrounding this thing, in ancient times in the Middle East, you had these, it makes reference to it in the book of Acts. They're all upset, and they say, great is, you know, Diana in Ephesus, or is it Artemis? They were interchangeable, Artemis, Diana. She was, again, sort of the fertility goddess. And they said, whose image fell from heaven? Whose image fell from heaven? And historical records say that the head of Diana was made from a black meteorite. It was a rock that fell from heaven, and her head was carved out of this black rock. Okay, so throughout the Middle East, you have these idols of these fertility goddesses whose image was carved out of black rocks that fell from heaven. And here you have this pagan shrine, and ultimately the encasement around the black rock is shaped like a female organ. And they all come up and they kiss it, and they do all these things, and they believe that it forgives their sins. And there's an Islamic tradition that says, I have no idea why we do this, other than I saw Muhammad do it, and since he did it, we do it. Other than that, we have no idea why we do it. Next slide. There's Khalid Mashal, the leader of Hamas. Next slide. I actually just saw that one right there was there, but some years ago there was refurbishments, and they brought in that new one. There was an old bronze encasement that went around it, that they have it in Istanbul, in a Sultanahmet Palace museum that they have there. This has been, you know, this image has been there for, 1,400 years. Again, throughout the Middle East, they worshipped these fertility goddesses. They worshipped these various war and moon astral deities. You know, they worship the moon and the sun. The God of Islam, the religion of Islam today, still bears the traces and the continuity between the ancient pagan religions of the Middle East. It's still there. Mecca is the capital of world idolatry. KAEC, King Abdullah Economic City. Again, many of you have heard about Dubai. You've seen pictures of Dubai. Next slide. Saudi Arabia is also building a city. They call it King Abdullah Economic City. Like Dubai, that burst forth out of nowhere overnight, this great city. Saudi Arabia has now also, for the past several years, been working on a new city. And it's going to sit just sort of down the coast from Mecca, essentially creating sort of a megalopolis with trains and buses moving people from KEC to Mecca and so forth, and creating this sort of economic and residential paradise right on the coast. Next slide. The construction site called Saudi Arabia. There's a picture of the island that they are building, and they're calling it Economic Island. Next slide. They're hoping to make KAEC completely surpass Dubai in terms of its ability to be the premier shipping and economic capital of the Middle East. They're moving in that direction. Next slide. There's another picture of, you know, again, artistic portrayal of what they're hoping to make this thing. Next slide. There's a picture of the world's largest building, again, Khalifa Tower in Dubai. Now, for context, the next slide, it is twice as tall as the World Trade Center. You can see there's some of the world's tallest buildings, and over there on the far right is the World Trade Center. The building that was just completed is twice as tall. Okay, twice as tall as the World Trade Centers. Next slide. This is the tower that Prince Al-Walid bin Talal is planning on now building in Jeddah. Twice as tall as Khalifa Towers and a heck of a lot bigger. Okay? Compare that. Look down there at the World Trade Center, and then you see this building, and that's the one that they want to build in Jeddah. Now, next slide. The Tower of Babel. You know, is there any measure of prophetic significance here? I think it's striking. You know, I mean, yes, it's not, I want to be careful not to read too much into it, but absolutely, in the heart of the Middle East, in the very location where mankind tried to build a tower to heaven, today they're using their oil money to flaunt their greatness in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is continuing to gradually rise as the economic powerhouse of the Middle East. Next slide. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of all harlots and the abominations of all the earth. Amen.
There we have it, folks. Just an outstanding video there. Joe Richardson and this Saudi Arabia being the harlot of Babylon. I have a on my YouTube channel. You guys will see it. USMC 9176. You will see there's a video there of the actual building that they're building in Jeddah as we speak. And they modified it a little bit. It doesn't look like it originally did, but it talks about it on there. But it's still huge, way bigger than Khalifa Towers in Dubai. And it's very significant that, I mean, it's just like you're looking at the Tower of Babel. And it's quite amazing to see this stuff going on. So it's just awesome to see that we're living in the time of Christ, you know, Christ's return. And if you don't believe that, well, then you must be living in a cocoon. You know, the evidence is overwhelming as to where the Antichrist is coming out of Saudi Arabia, not Rome, not the heart of Babylon. I actually also have get this for you. I actually have this article that I'll be going over later today. I'll be doing a video on this from the Tedland Daily. Awesome article entitled Vatican as the Harlot of Babylon Debunked. And that's by Theodore Schubot. And you know, he comes on our Bible studies. But he did an amazing article here. I'm going to read this in a video. And I'm going to try to forward these over to the churches, to their Facebook pages, and whatever pages they have out there I could send it to. And, you know, we got to wake our churches up, folks. We got to let people know what's going on. It is up to you. It is up to you to hold those who are teaching in the scriptures accountable to the scriptures themselves. Because when you go to heaven, or when you're being judged by Christ, he's not going to accept, oh, well, this is what my pastor taught me, and this is what this person taught me. He's going to say, why didn't you study for yourself? And what are you going to say? You know, you need to be found worthy. You do. And no one can stand for you at that time. I can't, Waleed Schubot can't, Theodore Schubot can't, none of your pastors can, none of these so-called Bible experts or scholars can. It's just you in Christ, and you better know what to say. You better be able to at least say, hey, you know, I believed in you, and it showed in what I did. Or you say, I believe in you, and he'll say, well, you didn't act like you did. You know? We don't have room for you here. Sorry. I believe our God is a God of doers. He wants doers to, you know, to enter his kingdom. Those that do his will. If you're doing things that are against his will, especially if you're willfully doing it, especially if you know what his will is and you choose to do opposite of it, you're in some serious trouble. And if you've been warned, and this is a warning to you, you're going up against the Catholic Church saying that the Antichrist, those are followers of Christ, the Catholic Church, our brothers and sisters. Christians and Catholics are the same. You people need to get that through your head. We're the same. We're on the same team. There's theological issues, sure, but it's not like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. Catholics are not like them. Catholicism is not a cult. Okay? You need to understand, yes, there are things within their theology that we can work through, but there's things in the evangelical Protestant movement as well that are questionable considering theology. I'm a perfect example of that because I've been kicked out for raising the questions. Kicked out. Have you heard of people getting kicked out? You probably haven't, because they're just like the government and they hush everything up like it doesn't happen. This stuff, you saw a great video, great information. Take advantage of it. Share this with others. It'll be on my YouTube channel pretty soon here, USMC 9176 or Chris G. Go to YouTube, put that in, and you can find it. All right, I'm going to title it, it'll give it a new name. I'm going to title it June 25th, Google Hangout Google On Air Hangout. That's what I'm going to entitle it. June 25th, 2013, Google On Air Hangout. So you want to get it, go to USMC 9176 or just put in the title. It'll be 6/25/13, Google On Air Hangout. Okay? God bless you all. I hope that this has helped you, and I want to try to do a lot more of these. I want to do one every day, but I'm not going to always be able to every day. But if you get a chance, go to Google Plus or plusgoogle.com, plusgoogle.com, and go to the, if you don't have an account, get one. They're free. Don't worry about the government listening to you. If they're listening to you, good. They need to hear this stuff, okay? Go to Google, get an account. If you don't have an account, go to the Google On-Air Hangouts, okay? And you could see whoever's doing an on-air hangout at that moment. And I'll try to be doing them right around the 3 o'clock, anywhere from 12 noon to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you get a chance during those hours, try to pop in Google On-Air Hangouts and see if I'm on. chances are I will be, but the titles will be something to the effect of, if I'm playing a video or something, maybe I should have a significant thing for you. I'll put infidel, okay? Infidel. From now on my Google Hangouts, I will start the title with infidel and whatever I'm doing, okay? So if you see infidel on there, it's me. Okay, I'm on Facebook under Marine Veteran. I'm on Google under Marine Veteran. I'm on Twitter under defend_the_USA. All capitals on USA. Defend is capital D, and then spell out the rest of the word defend. With a capital D, and then an underscore, and then the, not capital, underscore again, and then capital USA. Okay, that's on Twitter. I don't really do much communicating with others on Twitter. I use that to promote the videos that I put out, stuff like that. I'm also, again, on YouTube under USMC9176 or Chris G is my channel. Either one of those should come up, bring the channel up. USMC9176 should pull it up really quick. But that's it. God bless you all, and my prayer is that all of you will help in getting our churches back. Our churches back focused on Scripture, and that way we can go gain our country back in with bigger numbers. We could influence our country to come to the aid of Israel and persecuted Christians around the world. Okay, God bless, and